Space. Always attempting to be understood, perceived with time and with place. Reflections which were determining are determining still, for space is about delineations. I wish to begin in all simplicity by differentiating the space of nature from the space of culture, and to push the space of nature aside to focus only on culture. Culture, where human creation resides, where the meeting between people occurs and negotiations concerning the meaning of the space takes place. Space is as delicate as the wind. A substance floating and open, easily conquered and declared in ownership. Yet, it is always free. That is, if we fight for it. Space is what we do. Therefore, we can break the frames that define what it is and what it must be. The frames are walls, words, colors, lights, the feelings that we put into it, the atmosphere that we embrace, the norms that we have been taught. Space frames, and we can choose to see these frames and to confront them. Or we can choose not to see or not to hear. In our time, space is conquered. It is conquered by borders that claim land in the name of ownership, which justify surveillance within these borders. In such spaces, we are all potential criminals. We are all potential enemies, dangerous to others and to ourselves. In such spaces, it is important not to think too radically or to act as a threat. In our time, space is conquered. It is conquered by seductive tactics of consumerism that wish to reach us so that we can guarantee a constant growing profit as written by the laws of liberalism and guarantee security for all of us. For we cannot bear the thought of what might happen if it all collapsed. This is why there are no limits for how the agents of consumerism sneak in to plant their flag and declare their space as theirs, whether we take the message or ignore it. They own the communication and their statement becomes the frame. In our time, space is conquered. It is conquered by technological possibilities, feeding the information society with democratic approaches to this new virtual space, owned by everyone and no one, making everybody and everything accessible. A space that now produces an overwhelming expanse. A space that is up for negotiation still, making it attainable for the consumer tendency to easily take over, while we are hesitant of what to do with the possibilities. The greatest potential for the genuine meeting lies in the art space. An ode to art. Art is, and has always been, the imprint of a constant search for boundaries to capture aesthetics, form, and thoughts of an outstanding human creation in a given moment. Art observes and art listens, and in its presence we feel different, augmented, or more intense than we usually do when we find ourselves within the unquestionable norms that have melted into culture. Art opens our eyes, and it asks us to see and feel the world, to relate to it and with it, and go back to the world without forgetting our experience of it. Art is the friction between what you understand and what you do not understand. It is bound to be forever floating in the gap between all and nothing, in the membrane between the comprehensible world and the incomprehensible open that you cannot fully grasp. Art must reside in this open friction and be perceived in the moment that meets you exactly there, where you are. Art is the creation that comes closest to reminding us of a genuine meeting. Because in meeting with art, we are forced to meet ourselves. And more than ever, we need this meeting. Artistic creation has always existed, presenting itself in moments where we wish for more. And this wish then puts tangible handprints onto eternity. Art has refined its expression, cultivating it to seek the limits of form and spatial representation, with the body and light as desirable areas where one could demonstrate one's proficiency. Artistic languages have been developed and abandoned, or been reformed in the search for new expressions, striving for the most perfect shape for thousands of years. Because this creation, in its essence, is on the border between the comprehensible and the incomprehensible, art has often been used to capture our ideas about worlds beyond our understanding, and offered us imagery to fill the void with gods carved in stone or painted in pigments, capturing an essence to bring us closer to the ungraspable by eternalizing the moment. With industrialization and the vast growing technological developments of the 1800s, the artist was liberated from the role of representing of how a given society fills the void, either by mediating the divine or by eternalizing a moment of power. The artist became a thinker, free to fill out the void himself, to place a perspective on what he chose to see, both of the incomprehensible void and of the comprehensible world. The idea of the artist's genius was born and was carried on in the names of the first ones who were able to express themselves freely. Their aesthetic forms became expressions of cultivated education and unique creation, in itself almost divine. Throughout the 20th century, art freed itself from its medium. The traditional surfaces of canvas and stone moved towards the articulation of the concept to concretize the thought in words. Modernism. The age of the individual is still with us as a ghost, wishing to find a body on which to anchor itself and to be worshipped in the warmth of the sun. Art is a language that no one knows how to speak. The artist himself has authorial suggestions on what the work is about because he created it. The professionals of the art institutions have good suggestions to contextualize layers of the contemporary, of history, and relations to idioms of other artists or similar suggested problematics. A child might like the lines, the sounds, or the colors, but essentially, no one can claim the right to speak the language of art and state what it is about in terms of a truth. Because, in the end, all suggestions are only interpretations. The essence of a work of art is to be free, forever bound to drift in the open, entrenched with infinite impressions, which will unfold it without owning it, without drawing it into conclusion and closing it off. As such, art is openness in a concrete form. Because art is a language that can never be normalized. It is negotiated constantly. And that makes it the most suitable context for reminding us of the genuine meeting. Its meaning can only be interpreted from its constant floating position in the gap between what we seem to understand and what we have never understood. Always open. For that is what guarantees our movement. And movement, in the end, is life. Should it happen that art becomes a language spoken by clear definitions, it will lose its indefinable aspects that makes it a work of art, and it will become something else. This does not imply that you cannot speak the language of art. On the contrary, it is spoken through our interpretations, and we must never stop trying. It is exactly here where the meeting occurs, where the greatest potential in art unfolds itself to its fullest. The language of art has the greatest potential in our society for us to meet the genuine that is within us, because it forces you to meet yourself. For it is here, in silence, in the uncertainty toward what is going on and what is being said, that we are reminded how much we take for granted. That we constantly relate to truths and perspectives, and we don't want to let go. It is a reminder to tell us that we must be humble towards different meanings, towards others, and we must see ourselves and thereafter approach the other, each with our own reality. Meeting in an endless ocean of nuances that are all one whole. To use this potential of art, we must first approach the art institution. One, art history is a creation of the Enlightenment project, and so is the museum. The idea that a collection of objects could be organized into specific categories of knowledge to enlighten spectators. The collection of objects was thus transformed from a cabinet of individual curiosities into a container of defined knowledge. A one truth, making objects silence witnesses to the idiom of a particular style, whose wish was to collect everything into an easily understandable language of stylistic features. The museum today, despite everything that has happened and everything that has evolved, is still fighting with the concept of truth. The great publicly supported museums must be careful not to offend anyone, and under the banner Art for Everyone, they fight for survival in terms of resources which have turned them into heavy and tired ships. Ships that are sinking deeper and deeper into the harbor whilst coral and sediments cover them, making it impossible for them to see that in their essential being, they hold the greatest potential as constructed free spaces. People actively choose to engage with this space and approach it openly. Two, in the 20th century, the idea of neutral space was made manifest to shut the museums off from the contemporary by creating a space that in its minimalism removed itself from everything reminiscent of human influence and power. It had to be a pure space for pure art. A space that makes art an even more static object, not as a part of life, but removed from it and silenced. The idea that leads to this space is just as interested and charged as the nationalist galleries in the Enlightenment period. The danger being that the neutral space makes its motivation less transparent than the Bordeaux-colored halls of the palace, whose corridors led through the pride of the nation. The idea of the neutral space, in spite of solid critique and deconstruction, is still living. The greatest enemy of free potential in the art space is the hidden obscured. 3. At the same time as modernism occurred, art criticism found its place. At first, through the art connoisseur, Le Flaneur, who became a necessary figure to acknowledge the now free and buoyant artist, whose expressions and style became as nuanced as people themselves. Without a solid technical framework in which to place artistic creations within the power structures of society, many confrontations occurred with these first artistic efforts. Is this art? Or what is art? Were questions that still haunt us today. The art critic embraced the role as someone who endorsed and guaranteed that the artistic expression could be considered as art. And the institution would collect the approved geniuses, and with the value being set by those who were able to recognize the geniuses before anyone else could, establishing the desired status that encircled this specific value. The carousel is still going round and round and round, driven by the mechanism of hope to be that genius and to see that genius. 4. After the art critic, the next determining role was the curator. Previously, a merely administrative role hidden behind the archive shelves, taking care of the museum's collection and organizing exhibitions, the role is now transformed into an independent institution in itself. The curator now navigates the artworks and artistic projects and attends to the demands of the art museum and the conduit communicating with the public. Gradually, the curator has come to speak the language of critique as one who sees, chooses, communicates, and in the end endorses art. The curator is the best candidate to overcome the idea of a neutral space, because the role automatically situates a person behind the organization of the art space. The center of the curator's tasks can be found in the etymological root of the word curator, that is cura, which in Latin means care. A curator is thus someone who must both embrace an administrative position in taking care of mediation on all levels and also care for the art. The premise of this argument is that the art space always will be imbued with a certain meaning. The art space can never be neutral. An exhibition unfolds a certain approach and interpretation as displayed perspectives on art in space. But it can never articulate a truth about an artwork. For art in itself is free. This is why the art space needs to be considered together with our way of understanding art. Its history needs to be articulated, for the space will speak it under all circumstances. Put into a spatial context, an artwork becomes like a word on paper together with other words, creating a narrative. Elements of space, such as lines, light, color, atmosphere, scenography, text, the artwork itself, and other artworks, together all create a language that speaks of art on several levels. The art space is loaded with such multiple narratives. Better to be aware of them and to use them than to hide from them among the dusty shelves of the Museum of Universal Objective Facts as a rhetorical grasp that removes our responsibility of the subject in the didactic museum which gathers differences into a strange and standardized mass. Where is the trust in art and the people that meets art? There needs to be a clarification of the language of the art space. It should not be understood as something that dictates and closes off the space in a specific meaning. On the contrary, this language must be used to articulate the interpreted intentions behind the exhibition. A language that could form ideologies and genres to specify the different areas about art and thereby create the foundation for a genuine meeting with a clear subjective agenda. The art space must begin to speak. It must speak what is genuinely being said. It must speak the history, the differences, and the ideologies. It must speak the subjectivity rather than the conformed norms of objectivity. It must speak who is behind the narratives that unfold in the layers of the building and the collection, and it must speak of the experts behind the exhibition space and of the connections between the exhibited artworks and finally the artwork itself. Once the language of the art space is spoken and understood, critique can breathe there, ensuring that the space always stays open. The art space, more than any other cultural space, is potentially free because it must be open for the ever-changing artistic project. And the guests who enter this space expect it to be open. In the open, we are curious and we are humble. For we are reminded that we cannot take for granted what is being said. And it is here that we are able to start negotiating our way through the subjective individual meanings. This meeting contains what we normally don't wish to see or to be reminded of, which is that it is in the fragility of the subjective that the genuine is taking place. We can use the inclusiveness of the art space to unfold the full potential of art, to remind us of who we are, to remind us that the incomprehension we feel precisely is the approach that the world needs of us at this moment, where everything seems smaller and thereby finite. We see that within us the world is infinite. And it is here, right here, in this moment, that the open, incomprehensible infinite places a tangible imprint on the comprehensible, and the meaning of life whispers in our ear that life is happening now. And no one is to dismiss this, that life is there. Here we can begin. In a quiet moment, the gaze sends off its wish, and one foot walks in front of the other, forward.